right, everybody, welcome back. Excited for today's topic. We're going to be talking about how to avoid wasting time with vanity metrics in the search economy. The reason why we're talking about this is we were all in a room a few weeks ago. I'm losing track of time, David. And this idea of vanity metrics came up, and I wrote a note because a lot of information was being shared. And when I went back to my notes, I was like, oh, yeah, we talked about vanity metrics. This would make for a good episode of the search economy. So pumped to dig in today. David, welcome. What's new? How are you?
Excited to jam? Man, it's summer out in Colorado, which means I'm outside 24/7. So, slightly sunburnt, pretty tired. The dogs aren't bothering me because they are just completely worn out from looking at every animal on the trail, including a mountain goat. Actually, like a horde of mountain goats, which was really cool to see. So, they had no idea what to do. Wouldn't expected them to do much of anything, but yeah, man, it's nice out here, and excited to spend some time talking on vanity metrics.
So I
And I
think
think it
maybe
was
that
2 weeks ago, by the way. I had to think about it, but I think it was two.
So maybe something we haven't talked about a lot at Numa, and you kind of teed it up, is that we're distributed across the world, and we live in very many locations. So when we cover each other's weekends, the Colorado crew are talking about scaling mountains and seeing wild animal, and I'm talking about like looking behind glass and taking my daughter to see penguins at the zoo. And then we've got people in other countries who are seeing crazy stuff. So it's the fun part about if you're ever working with Numi, you get people from everywhere. So that's been a fun
I think we had
ramp
somebody at
up.
the Euros this weekend. Uh, Jim just got back from Iceland and was traveling everywhere. I was hiking. A couple people at Broad were hiking. A couple events. It is fun because you get to see a little slice of everything. I'd say it is cool.
So vanity metrics, the topic at hand. I think when you say vanity metrics, many people think of a lot of different things. In marketing, it is something that has constantly come up throughout my career. I know it was a hot button issue when it came up in the room. Want to maybe kick off the conversation by just defining vanity metrics. Like, what does vanity metrics mean to you?
Yeah, I would almost say vanity metrics are everything but attributed revenue by what we're doing. So, um, how much cash did we put into your business? That's the metric that we should be tracking. Vanity metric is everything that comes before that: traffic, sessions, visitors, keyword rankings. And if you're a client and you're listening to this and you're confused, hear me out because I'll bring it full circle. Vanity metrics aren't inherently bad though, and I think like I don't definitely don't want to demonize them on the podcast today, but also want to talk about they have a role, but the role should always come second to tracking what the revenue produced is. So we do track sessions and visitors and traffic and keyword rankings for our clients. Those are all good things because they're the input to the output that we want, and that output is going to be revenue. So I oftentimes, as we talk about vanity metrics and define them, it's everything but revenue. Vanity metrics aren't bad, but if that's the only thing you're tracking, it is for vanity because you have no real understanding of the impact that it's making on your business.
So I guess I wonder this often because it gets sideways when you're a marketer and you're trying to push an initiative forward with your leadership team. Let's just use SEO for example, where you start getting into some of these vanity metrics, and people who aren't in marketing or who don't sit in the marketer seat start to like. You can just tell when you start bringing up bounce rate and time of sessions and all these things. It's like their brain goes into outer space because the only thing that they're thinking about is, well, how does this actually
Why
tie
does
back?
it matter? Yeah.
Why
Why
does it
do I
matter?
care about the bounce rate or your engagement rate, conversion rate? I always say where agencies leave people short is that they only give you vanity metrics and that's it. They never give you a reason why. We might have a 45-minute conversation about a client's bounce rate with a client. And it could be the best conversation that they have because we're explaining how it contributes to revenue, what changes we want to make. But just reporting on it as a number in a closed environment, in a closed silo, doesn't really get you very far. And I think using them for a client, especially for SEO, right? You want to track number of visitors to a site, the number of sessions, the number of unique users. Impressions are another pretty easy one to track. You want to track really all the high level stuff about people coming to your site, bounce rate, engagement rate. But utilizing those metrics is saying, okay, let's take this section of 10 to 12 to 14 metrics, however many we're tracking. How are these contributing to revenue? Do we have a good understanding about if bounce rate goes down, what is going to happen? If engagement rate goes up, what is going to happen? And a lot of times it's just we track those metrics as vanity metrics and just hope that they're going to turn into revenue. And without a strategy to turn vanity into revenue metrics, inputs into outputs, they really just stay inputs. They're fun to track. You can make them go up and down, but they never really impact the business that you're trying to build.
So maybe you've alluded to some of them here, but maybe just in working with clients, different types of vanity metrics that often are part of the conversation. Like, what are the? I know there's a lot of different, and maybe a lot of them are derived from like how Google Analytics is set up. But maybe what are some examples just for the listener of vanity metrics, like the most important ones, or the ones that are often at the top of the conversation?
Now, I'll give the two easiest and how I think about it, right? You have some keyword statistics and you have some more data heavy statistics on who's coming to your site. The easiest vanity metric is visitors, right? Tracking that. More visitors doesn't always mean more revenue. Less visitors doesn't always also mean less revenue, as confusing as that may be. It's a signal, right? If you have a good site and you know who you're targeting and you're targeting the right people and your visitors go up, all of those things are inputs that contribute to the output of revenue. But visitors alone, that only tells, I wouldn't even say half the story, maybe a quarter of the story. And the other, I would say, vanity metric we always see is that, hey, keyword rankings. I had 100, now I have 110, 120, now I have 130. Are they even the right keywords? Are they the ones you should be going after? And how are they contributing to revenue? If this keyword's on the first page, how many visitors is it actually contributing? And what are those visitors doing on the website? So I think the two easiest ones are just the number of keywords you have ranked on your site and the number of visitors. They're great metrics to track, but not in a silo. Understanding how those contribute to revenue is arguably the most important part. Other ones I use sessions, engagement rate, conversion rate, bounce rate. You can filter all of those down, but I still think the two that everybody falls back on, the two that people are most familiar with, are visitors and number of keywords indexed or number of keywords ranked.
So I am this has like been in the back of my brain and I've been waiting to bring this up, so I'm very excited. It's taken 10 plus or however many of these episodes we've done, but I want to key in on the site visitor because as I have worked with different SEO vendors and subject matter experts, I feel like the measurement, just as someone who was very green on the power of SEO, was always like, okay, well, you're doing your job if that site visitor number is going up. Now, never really taking the digging in deeper of being like, well, actually, who are these site visitors? Are they people who can actually buy our product or service? So I don't know. I would imagine like the site visitor paradox or dilemma, whatever you want to call it, is still very much a thing where I don't know if we're not supposed to be looking at the number of site visitors, or we can use it as some barometer. Like, what should we be focusing in on instead with the SEO person or vendor that we're working with?
Yeah, there's not even a book about marketing. There's a really good book I read. Still tell people all the time, changed my life. If you're listening to the podcast and you want a copy, I always make a rule that I will buy it for you. It's called Factfulness by Hans Rosling. Without getting into all the depths of it, one thing that always stuck with me is, hey, never look at a number by itself. Always look at a number with a friend. And the meaning of that is don't look just at visitors. Look at visitors over the amount of revenue, or visitors or compared to the number of leads, right? Build a ratio, build a percentage. And that's one thing that I always try and do with clients as well and coach into the team. Hey, visits alone don't mean anything, but let's look at conversion rate, or let's look at cost per lead, or let's look at how many visits we need to get to the site before we get a form filled. Right. I'm using very basic things. Not that everyone's always super familiar with GA4 or analytics or the way that stuff's set up, but I would say that's something to always look at is just, okay, out of the number of visits you get to your site, how many of them are quality leads that you'd be going after? Or how many are leads, and then how many of those leads are quality leads? Understand the breakdown in percentages. But I always say, don't ever look at a number just by itself. Visits alone tell you nothing, right? Compared to the month prior, the projections for the month future, that's help. Looking at it from an angle of, okay, how many visits does it take to get $1,000 in revenue, 2,000, 3,000? Like e-commerce naturally does this pretty well because of Shopify and other things of that sort. But you can see What's your revenue? How many visits you get? Great. Every visit contributes X amount to revenue. And how can I get more visits? And does that number change? And what's the conversion rate? So I always say the easiest way to really start looking at your data is taking a vanity metric, something like a visits or the number of keywords that are indexed, taking a revenue metric. Easiest thing is probably leads or revenue, and either dividing, finding some type of ratio, something that compares the two and gives you a metric to say, okay, for every, I'll make easy math, for every 10 visitors, we get a customer. What happens if we double, right? And then you can start to look at the types of goals and initiatives you want to take on. Let's say it used to be for every 10 visitors, I got a customer. Now it's for every 20. What do I need to do on the site to make it convert better? How do I get more visitors? How do I get better visitors? So it's a longer thing to go all the way back to Factfulness, which is still a good book, but make sure your data has a friend. Don't look at it in a silo because it never really tells the full story, but it's not going to help you make a good decision either.
I think maybe your response to this next portion will go back to what you just talked about, but dig in deeper. Maybe it won't, but I have this thought process a lot around like the marketer and who we report to, and a lot of us report to our boss or our boss's boss, and a lot of them got into that position based on this old way looking, tracking, thinking of vanity metrics, and thinking about things like site visitors, and that being the end all be all. So it's really hard to overcome a conversation with them that is about something different than those vanity metrics that they're used to. Um, in this hypothetical situation where I'm a client or a prospective client coming to you, David, and I'm saying, hey, we need better SEO. My boss is breathing down my neck about more site visitors. Like, how do you go about and have that conversation with that marketing manager who's knows they need SEO but might be tracking or pursuing that strategy in the not maybe most directionally correct fashion that's going to lead to better overall KPIs for their business?
Well, one thing you said, whether it was to cue me up or not, is that it's data that they're used to tracking, and I see this 9 times out of 10. Founder says, "Well, we need more site visitors," or breathing down a director of marketing's neck, and that's what he or she is saying, and it's okay. Why? Well, visits contribute to revenue, and I always bring up an example of we had a client that lost 50% of their traffic purposefully. There's a whole suite of strategy as to why, but we cut 50% of their traffic and their revenue went up. Right? You want the right visitors, right? Like and I always, play the game, but like, okay, you want more visitors. I got a bunch of friends that like, they're in high school. They could all come to your site. Is that what you want? It's, no, no, no. I want the right people. Okay. We want more. So we want more of the right people. How many of those right people do you have in your site now? I don't know. Right. So it's playing that game out because, I can't blame people. The perception is more people, more revenue. Like that's the working assumption or thesis. And before we get too deep into like logic of it, but right, I don't blame anybody. That's just what I think everybody's perception is. If I get more people on the site, I'm going to sell more. There's definitely some nuance to everything there, but there's nuance to diving a little bit deeper and understanding what types of traffic do you want, but also asking the best question as to why. Why do you want more traffic? Why do you want more visitors? And oftentimes you'll hear, well, I think it's going to be XYZ, or I've been told, or so and so, a competing company, or like a friend of mine said they got more visitors and they got more revenue. That's all great, but right, let's figure out what you're basing that assumption on. And sometimes, and honestly, oftentimes, more traffic is better, but it's always more traffic with an asterisk. You don't want a bunch of high schoolers on your site that are just Googling for fun. You want the right people. And it's recreating that to make sure it's not just, I need more visits. It's, I need more of the right people on my site that are going to take the right actions for my company. So that's always the toughest part about that conversation because that founder is never really wrong. You might need more traffic. 9 times out of 10, you probably need. Not everybody's going to be somebody where you cut traffic and get more revenue. But there's a lot of nuance into that. It's not just more traffic for the fun of it. And it's certainly not going to be traffic that you can get quickly. You got to work to get the right traffic and be deserving of the people that are going to come to your site either way.
One of the key things we talk a lot about is time and time it takes in order for results to hit. And in this scenario where we cut traffic, I would imagine like it might take a minute for the conversions or the revenue driver, those key things to take place. So like if you're the marketer in this position where you're managing this new SEO strategy, and you have to report to this weekly meeting where you're talking to your stakeholders, and every week you're reporting, our numbers are going down, but I think, we're going to be on this right track. Like, and I'm sure you get a lot of like looks through the computer screen, or if you're in person, like, I don't know about this. Like, how would you advise kind of the individual who's quarterbacking the process as something like that is taking place to, have confidence in what's going on and be able to communicate that with their leadership team?
You're a runner, so you'll like this analogy. When you let's say you set out to run a marathon, you don't expect to finish the marathon in 1 mile because it's a much longer race than that. You also don't expect to finish the marathon in, I don't know, 12 minutes, 13 minutes. Of course not. Like it's also a much longer race. Oftentimes, I think whenever people invest in SEO, they're like, okay, SEO is this marathon we're going to do. Great. How much can we done in week one? Like, well, hold on, back up. It's not a week by week. We need to think a little bit longer than that. And I often say, what's the most important part if you talk to a marathon runner about their pace that they're setting or like the time that they want to get? They don't run the whole race and then they look at their clock and they're like, oh man, I'm surprised by that. Or like, oh, that was really good. No, no, you know it. Every step they got their Garmin's or whatever on, right? And they're like, okay, cool. First mile split 6:30, second 6:14 in a negative split, going the right way, right? Like you're trending in the right direction and you're projecting the success that you're going to have so that when you finish, you might only be off by a few seconds of what you knew you were going to get to. That's the way I see a lot of marketing initiatives that I guess they should be run that way, and I don't think they are. They're just kind of like, okay, at the end of the engagement, what did we get? Oh, we were really far off. I wish I would have known that earlier. Or we crushed it and I don't know why. And I think that's often the thing that I see. But the advice that I give anybody running this and reporting it up, what's the mile time that you can create within your marketing program to pace yourself every single week to know that 26 weeks into the future you're going to be in a fantastic spot, but you can show people, hey, we are heading in the right direction. We just did exactly what we needed to do this week to set ourselves up for the next week, to set ourselves up for the following week. If we keep this trend up, if we keep doing the right things, we're going to be at the finish line in the time frame that we set. Setting the time frame is always the hard part. It might be another whole podcast as well, but I think that's the biggest thing, right? Like marketing anything, and I think SEO has this old school thing of like it takes time. Name me a marketing initiative that really doesn't take time. Everybody uses paid media of like, oh, turn it on and get revenue. Hold on. That's not how that works at all. It takes a little bit more than turning it on. Like there's a gap between turning it on and getting the revenue. Every marketing initiative takes time. So SEO isn't unique by any means, but I think SEO actually has the best benefit because you can show a trend. Hey, if we can get 10 keywords to the first page every single week, by the end of the 6 months, we'll have X amount on the first page, and that's projected to bring in this amount of revenue. Let's just focus on getting 10 every single week. And, I think making your focus area smaller, but also showing the trend and the pacing that you're heading in the right direction are two really good things. Because oftentimes I'll just say, or I'll see, hey, we want to run a marathon. Great. Can we get it? Like, are we done? How quickly can we get done? Or like, can we get it done in a mile? And once you convince somebody that it's going to take longer, then by mile 3 you could be running 5-minute miles and somebody might say, we just haven't finished the marathon yet. I want to cut this initiative. I don't think it's working. Right? It's working fantastic. You're setting a great pace. You just got to trust the process. So a lot of nuance, a lot of words in there as well, but I always come back to the marathon analogy of, understand where you are in the process, understand how fast you need to run to make sure that you find success, and then track that pace. If you're slower, speed up. If you're faster, maybe you don't need to go as fast, but understand where you're at and where the pace is at, and understanding that even if you're at mile 3, that doesn't mean it's a failure or success. It just means you got 23 more miles to go. And if you run at the right pace, you could be successful.
We're pretty upfront, and I think we can even probably even do a better job of this, of letting people know that like we do SEO, we do PPC website stuff, but like we're here to help grow your revenue. We've got the score methodology that we use, and that's how we communicate to people who are interested in SEO. And as I've been here for 90 days, it's something that like I'm getting ramped up on, and it makes a lot of sense to me. I guess, how have you, in those conversations with people up front, maybe overcome or help change the perception for the better around vanity metrics when someone's like, well, yeah, I'm coming to you because I'm looking for more eyeballs on my website? How do you like turn that conversation into maybe not saying, hey, that's not how you should be looking at it, you should be looking like this, in a delicate way where you more or less show them the light?
Yeah, I guess it's book recommendation time. I actually don't remember. I think it was the book by Tony Dungy, out of all people. Think
Quiet strength.
Yeah, I love that book. Think with the end in mind. Right. What's success look like for a client? It's revenue. It's money in the pocket. At the end of the day, most people, and especially if you're listening to this, whether you're a prospect or you just like the podcast, you might think you care about all the inputs, but you don't. You care about revenue. As soon as an agency starts contributing revenue, you are going to quickly care less about the tactics that go into it, and you're just going to trust them to contribute revenue. I say all of that, right? Whenever clients bring notions of like, we need this amount of visits a month, I always come back to the same question: why? Or like, okay, what are we optimizing for? I want more clients. Great. How do more visits contribute to more clients? Like, what math have we done? And oftentimes, there are clients that bring up great math. They've done the homework. They know that that's exactly, they know their conversion rate with traffic. If they can get these keywords, I'm like, okay, great. Your assumption is you actually do need more visitors because we fleshed it out. We know the idea, and we've connected vanity metrics to revenue metrics. But it's always asking for that connection, right? Why is that the right amount of visits to get to that right amount of revenue? Or think backwards, how much revenue do you need? Have you worked backwards from that standpoint? Sometimes people do, sometimes people don't, and that's totally fine. But it's walking through that process of say, okay, if this is the big vision, if this is the road trip that we're going to set out on, what's the map? Have you printed it out like you used to in the old school? Or like, do you got it plugged in on Apple Maps ready to go? Sometimes clients do, sometimes clients don't. But understanding that process and having the map laid out of how to connect revenue to vanity, or a vanity of revenue, or vice versa, I guess, for that regard, that's ultimately the most important part. And understanding that and getting people in that frame of reference and frame of mind, whether delicate or not, oftentimes it's more, hey, we got to have this to be successful for you. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but challenging clients to have that connection, I found has been the most important part.
So I constantly go back to the conversation we had, the first conversation, I think, with Jonathan Rivera of Superior Attic. And I mean, me as the marketer, I'm like, okay, how can I take snippets of everything he said and like plaster it on a billboard for everyone to see? Because it's like that's the maturity of where I think like the most successful business owner, they're in that light in the search economy. So I guess what are some of the things that we've talked about revenue metrics a lot, but I know not everyone's going to get to the Jonathan level overnight, but how can how do you see in just the relationships that you've managed throughout the journey of Numa, like people moving from like dropping vanity metrics to moving more towards these revenue metrics and the types of things or characteristics that they're doing that others might take note of?
Yeah, I think there's two ways that I would look at it, like a very basic funnel. I would look at the number of visitors that you'd have, and I look at the number of keywords that are indexed on your site, especially from like a search perspective. I would look at both of those things and how they contribute to the number of form fills that you have. So let's say you have 100 keywords ranked, you get 100 visitors a month to make it easy, and you get one form fill. That rate right there is okay, cool. Whether visitors or keywords, right? Let's take visitors. There's about a 1% conversion rate. With that one lead, how many of those do you need before they become a client? And how much does a client typically spend? Those four metrics, I think, is a very easy quote unquote, and I hate the word, but a quote unquote funnel to look at and set up as you continue to build the business, but you move away from vanity metrics and start to connect it to revenue metrics, right? Understanding the number of visitors, again, is okay. But if it's in a silo, it's not helpful. Looking at that next to how many of those visitors contribute to a lead, how many of those leads need to have before one becomes a customer, and how much a customer spends. Those four metrics are very good to track. And now you can have branches, you can be more detailed later on, but is a starting point. Every business can look at that, especially if you're an appointment based business. You need to talk to somebody before they check out with you or buy from you. Think of like a roofer, right? We'll give the easy example. For every 1,000 visitors, they get 10 leads on their site. For every 10 leads, they get, let's say, two customers. And for every customer, they spend 10 grand. So for every 1,000 visitors, they're contributing 20 grand to revenue. How can we get more of the right people? Maybe 1,000, maybe 500, but understanding that semblance of how people move from visit to revenue and having data to support each stage and how it filters down, it's the easiest place to start. You, if you're listening to this, you likely have that data at your fingertips. You just got to put it together and use it in the right way.
I want you to know that every time you use the roofing example, it just is a trigger for me because it's a reminder that in my home we are due a new roof, and I keep kicking the can.
Well, kick it until it starts raining, and then I think you'll be using those cans to soak up the water.
There we go. Let's close it out. The movement away from vanity metrics, it's not easy, especially when you've got spreadsheets and you've got marketing plans and you're communicating these metrics. And I think you did a good job of saying like vanity metrics aren't all bad. They can give you indication on something. But what do you think happens when you start to spend less time and move away from vanity metrics and then focusing more on kind of revenue based metrics with your SEO and digital
I
strategies?
think the one thing is you realize how much opportunity is on the table to improve from lead, really from lead to real prospect to close deal. There's such an opportunity to improve that process. A lot of our clients we can give more visits to, but the back end process, what happens next after they fill out a lead, isn't always that great. Improving that, you might actually find a lot of revenue there. But I think the other thing as well, once you have those metrics and you understand how people go from lead to form fill to prospect or a call scheduled to a client and how much that client actually earns you over the course of, let's say, a year, 2 years, you get to see your full process on paper and you get to ask the right questions. Maybe it's not more visitors. Maybe it's a better form. Maybe it's a better experience. Maybe it's better conversion on the site. Maybe it's instead of SEO, we should try some paid and loop those together to get better, higher quality traffic, right? Again, I always like when someone says, I need more visitors on the site. Okay, why? Sometimes that answer is right, sometimes it's wrong, but you don't know until you have all of the data. So I always say keep your vanity, but start attaching revenue metrics to it and understand the full picture and start asking the right questions because we might work all the way back around to saying, okay, I do need more visitors. But now you know what's going to happen. You know how much it means to you in the business, how much it's going to earn you, and you can make better, really database decisions on what you need to do and why you need to do it. And I think that's the biggest opportunity of moving away from vanity metrics. It's not a guessing game. Hope isn't a strategy, and getting more visitors to the site because you hope that it's going to contribute to revenue is not a very good marketing strategy, and it's not one that a founder is going to be all that pleased with. But getting more visitors to the site because every visitor contributes X amount of leads, or there's that percentage conversion rate, right? That's something that can get people excited, and it's something that you can put money behind because there's a formula in place that you can hold against. So I think that's the biggest thing. Moving away from vanity metrics and bringing in the revenue metrics takes out a lot of the guessing, and you can really report up, report out. But an agency can report to you as well. Hey, as we get more and more visitors, here's what's going to happen to your site. Here's what's going to happen to your business. And then when it happens, that's even better, and you can pour more money back into that system.
Hopefully, this conversation got you thinking a little bit differently about the metrics that you are tracking for your SEO. I'll have to dig back through my notes and see what we're going to talk about next, David, but appreciate the conversation. This was fun.
It was a good one.